What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at a PvT game between Stats and Innovation from Olimo League May Finals. This is a game from a best of 3 series, but this is the only game we'll be doing now. Perhaps I'll do the rest of the series another time, but I watched this game and I thought it was an interesting game to have a look at. At the moment, a lot of Terrans are struggling in this matchup. And I think Innovation is actually one of the only Terrans that I see win somewhat consistently, as the complaint from the Terrans might not be completely ungrounded. So let's just see what Inno does different from the other Terrans. And I also kind of want to have a look at how Stats plays this. I think Stats is one of those guys that usually has a very solid style and is extremely consistent in tournaments. Like, he's one of those guys that's always going to be in the top 8, top 4 of any tournament, no matter what the player lineup is. He's always going to be in one of the top contenders. So he opened up with a regular gate scout. Now the kind of thing that you want to see is, of course, the single gas. You want to see the barracks timing, and you want to see the command center go down. So he saw all of those things. He saw the barracks at home, so he doesn't really have to be too worried. He'd opened up with a core before Nexus, which means you have approximately 2 to 3 probes less, but it does allow you to perhaps fend off the Reaper a little easier and maybe even put on some counter pressure with your first adept on the other side of the map. Perhaps you can delay this command center from building for a bit. He already did some damage with his probe on this SCV, and perhaps he wants to go across the map with this adept, and now he can 2-shot this SCV. If you just hit an SCV once with a probe, you can already 2-shot it with an adept. You only need to do 1 or 2 damage, but the probe does 5, so that's fine as well. So let's see what he decides to do with a first adept. Does decide to shade it, and then moves toward the Reaper ramp. This is the most likely position for the Reaper to jump in. Most likely will cancel the shade. He does not want to lose any probes. He already cut some eco by getting core before Nexus, and he can't really afford to lose any more probes. So yeah, it goes well for him. Gets the Stalker as a second unit, also chrono boosted, then goes straight into Twilight Council. This is a rather uncommon build, actually. Most of the time, when you see Protosses play Blink first, or any kind of Blink opener, usually it is Adept Stalker and then Robo and then Twilight, so you have the fast scout with the Observer. Or what Protoss players will do is they'll open up with Stalker Sentry and then Twilight, and then you have the fast scout with the hallucination, so you can see what's coming from the Terran, whether it's some kind of tank push, or maybe Cloak Banshee, or just a regular Widowmine drop. It's very important to get that information early. Stats, however, is opting to play it a little different. So he'll have less information. Actually, he won't have any information until maybe the 5-minute mark. So he's going to be playing a little bit blind. Now, Innovation, of course, wants to go back into the main base with that Reaper, and he's completely happy to lose this Reaper as long as he sees the deck. And he, of course, did see the Twilight Council, so he probably knows that it's going to be Blink. It could be DT, but there's no Robo. Most of the time with DT, you do some kind of DT drop. Adept, Glaive, and Charge, not really that common. So I think Innovation is smart enough to realize that it is going to be Blink. Well, we see 3 gate units, Blink starting, and then a second gateway. And I'm very curious how many Chrono Boost he will actually put on top of this Twilight Council. We actually see a Robo before a third gateway, which kind of makes sense. As I mentioned earlier, he does want to get that fast information. It's already going to be rather late. I mean, the Robo finishes at about 4:20, maybe 4:15, something like that. Then the Observer still needs to be built. Sure, you can chrono boost it, but also needs to fly across the map. So really the earliest time this Observer is going to arrive is maybe 5:10, 5:20. And that's extremely late to get your first real scout of the Terran base in a game. So he's going to be playing rather blind, and I'm curious to see what his unit movement will be like. How will he defend against everything? How will he be safe against things when he doesn't know that they will be coming? So the first threat that I'm thinking about, if I'm Stats right now, is, hey, the only thing I've seen is this barracks. I don't know if he actually has reactor Hellion, so I would like to have a wall, but Stats does not seem to have any kind of issue with not having a wall. He only has 3 units. 4 Hellions could be running in right now, and I think Stats would be in a world of trouble, but perhaps this is a risk that Stats takes, or perhaps Stats knows something that I don't, or has a special way of defending this, and doesn't feel too scared because of that. Third gas. Most of the time when people open Blink, you will get the third gas, then the third base, and then perhaps double forge or single forge, and then go up to 8 gateways as soon as possible to really get that production going. Innovation, on the other hand, is playing rather standard, just going for a siege tank, a raven, going for a defensive posture, getting 3 racks before the third CC as well, so might be planning on... Wait, he actually cancelled the tank? Okay, so he's still gonna get it, but he was getting one earlier, then decided to fly away. That's a bit odd. But yeah, probably will be doing some kind of tank push, I want to say, with 2, 3 tanks, or maybe just 1 tank and then going into Widow Mines is also possible, of course. This should be rather hard for Stats to break. Stats actually is building a lot of freaking Stalkers. Most of the time when you see Protoss players play this kind of build, they don't want to build too many Stalkers, because unless they manage to do a lot of damage, they're not actually that useful. You prefer getting faster tech, or just getting more Zealots to get some more oomph, you know, some more punch, some more power in your army, rather than Stalkers, which are rather weak. They don't fight as well in a straight up fight. They're good at blinking away, picking up stuff, but if you can't do that, usually it becomes very difficult. Now, here we see the third base going down, like I mentioned, going into double forge. So this is the riskier version, obviously, than single forge. It makes the first push a little harder to stop. But it does set you up very nicely for a beautiful 2-2 timing in the mid game most of the time. So if you do survive any kind of 6:30, 7-minute push, usually you can set yourself up to a beautiful 2-2 timing, perhaps with a prism in the main and a prism with your army, hitting the third and the main at the same time, and the Terran should have a hard time with that. Stat has the observer with his army, sees that there's a Raven, expects there to be a tank, most likely. He sees the factory with the tech lab. If I was Stats, I would be really scared to blink in here. So I'd be very surprised if Stats actually blinks in here without having full info, because in my head there's going to be a tank here, and there's still a Raven which will be able to put down 2 auto turrets rather soon. So I think you just want to kind of poke a little at the Marines, perhaps run over here, try to poke a little at the bunker, get a feel for what kind of units he really has. Let's see what Stats does. Oh, it's actually a blink in. There's no tank, so it works out okay. Gets the first auto turret, gets a bunch of Marines actually. What is Inno doing as a response? Gets the tank up. Oof, this is a very risky blink. He does get the Raven, but he's going to lose a lot of Stalkers for this. Auto turret has a lot of DPS as well. Okay, yeah, this was not a good trade for Stats. Let's have a look at the units lost. He lost a lot. And most importantly, he lost any kind of mechanism to delay the push. Usually what you want to do with the Stalkers, if your opponent moves out, especially if they don't have a lot of Marauders, it's really nice to just poke at that army, blink back, poke at that army. But now Stats won't have that opportunity. So even though the trade looks rather even, I think this is way better for Inno than it actually is for Stats. Meanwhile, we see Stats actually floating a little bit of money, which is quite bad with this, as this build is rather tight. He's getting the 1-1, but he's lacking his gateways. There should already be 5 extra gateways on the way, going up to those 8 gateways. Perhaps I wouldn't even mind seeing a prism to perhaps delay the push, so whenever Innovation moves out, you go in with the prism and try to keep him on his side of the map that way. But maybe Stats doesn't feel like he actually can afford it and might just get an Immortal instead. Innovation probably also confused as to why he did that blink in, as it didn't seem like the brightest move. Now, here we go up to the 5 gates, like I mentioned before. Still on 3 gases. A rule that I tend to use when I play PvT is that I don't want to go up to 5 gases or 6 gases before I see my opponent's third, or before I feel safe in a way. So either after I kill the push, or I know that I will be able to kill the push coming from the 3 barracks rather easily. Stats had to rebuild a couple of stalkers, so he can still kind of poke at this army, but actually rebuild a lot of stalkers, which means the rest of his army is basically non-existent. All he has right now is 8 stalkers and 1 adept. So this push by innovation, which isn't really supposed to kill or do a lot of damage, actually is looking rather scary for stats at the moment. He's warping in a couple of zealots and he's doing some good work with these. You see right now he's actually ahead in units lost. 1-1 is 19 seconds away from being done. He has pretty bad vision, I want to say. He can't see this area, he doesn't really see this area. Of course he saw Inno move in this direction, but there could be a drop heading to the main. From here to the main, that could be an issue as his vision is lacking in that area. I wouldn't mind seeing a pylon here, or an observer, or a probe, or a zealot for that matter. It's always nice to have some extra vision. The vision never really hurt anyone. So, setting up for an engagement. Another thing I wouldn't really mind, if you're playing against rather high tank counts, is to have a couple of zealots flanking. It doesn't have to be a lot of zealots, but just 2-3 zealots really helps and makes it a lot harder for the Terran opponent to kind of kite backwards towards his tanks. In this case, the army that Inno has actually isn't that big. It mainly consists of these tanks. These are the big damage dealers. The rest is kind of weak. So if you can get to the tanks, you're most likely going to be in a good spot. So here we go. He fights before Guardian Shield, which is honestly a terrible decision. Okay, here we go. Guardian Shield finally gets spot, but the fight is pretty much over already. Stats actually managed to clean this up relatively easily with the 1-1 upgrade. Of course, this is a very long map. Units get slowed in these massive time warp bubbles. There's 6 of those on the map, so reinforcing is extremely difficult on this map. So this fight, I want to say, was pretty nice for stats. He pushed it away and he has the 2 forages. So he's starting 2-2 and innovation is about halfway done with his +1 armor. So definitely a big upgrade leader for stats, who will be able to hit a beautiful 2-2 timing if he wants to. He also has vision on a potential third base, so he sees nothing is here, he sees nothing is here, and of course he sees the orbital morphing in at the natural of innovation. Innovation going for a scan, perhaps wanting to see if there's any units here, so his drop can get in. But stats is decently ready, has 2 stalkers, an immortal and a warp in of 3-4 zealots. Should be able to clean this up without too many losses. It's okay to trade units in this kind of situation, as long as you don't lose probes or important tech structures. As the probes, you're pretty happy, I would say. So the plan for stats, in my mind, is get 1 prism or 2 prisms and then hit a 2-2 timing. Sending your prism from this angle into the main base, maybe 1 or 2 zealots into the natural, and then you hit the third base. And you're not really committed towards killing the third base, but you just keep his army busy while the zealots in the main and the zealots in the natural do the work. So instead what stats is doing, he seems to be going for a little bit of a run-by setup here. With this observer, always making sure that there's nothing at the third, so his run-by can get in. Right now he saw some units, so it's like, alright, probably not worth it to go in there. Now if we check the vision of stats, it actually is a little weak, I have to admit. He has 2 observers over here, and once again this complete area is completely blind, which is very dangerous. Of course, most of the time Terrans are going to be flying in that space, so this area will be rather popular, and he does have that covered with this observer, but this area is so dangerous to not have anything there, and it's really scaring me for stats at the moment. Well, he does spot this in time. There is a recall available, so perhaps he can recall some units, or maybe he feels comfortable walking. No, he does recall about 10, 12 zealots and an immortal, so this should be a pickup for innovation. Don't think he can do too much here. All right, these are the kind of moments where as a Protoss player, what you want to be doing is you want to be counter-attacking at the same time on the other side. And Stats has the incredible calm of mind to do this. So he selects his run-by group, sends them into the third base. Because most of the time what Terrans do is they will be rallying somewhere else, or they'll be gearing up to push over here, perhaps, in this area. So if you do a run by, you make sure that that doesn't happen. If that does happen, if the Terran is on your side of the map with everything, he will need to pull away his SCVs from the third base or lose a bunch of them. So very good move by Stats. Let's get back to this drop. Like I said, gets cleaned up rather easily. Losses about even, not that important. I don't like this Templar Archives positioning. I do love this Prism. This is very good. But right now we're gonna have a timing as this Prism comes in, where Stats basically will have 2-2 in about 20 seconds from now, and Innovation won't have it for another 2 minutes. So for the next 2 minutes, Innovation needs to dodge a big fight. He can't be fighting. If he fights, it needs to be in a very favorable position, but preferably no fights for Innovation. He has a small supply lead, but it doesn't mean that much because Stats has about 1,000 minerals on the bank. The one thing that does surprise me by Stats is that he isn't taking a forward base. Usually when you see this kind of style, the heavy gateway style, is that you'll see an 8:30 or an 8-minute forward base. But Stats on the other hand is actually not opting for that at all. So that's very interesting. Now, once again, something that I always find very important to look at is actually the vision of the Protoss. What does he know of the army movement of the Terran? Now, Stats finally has covered this area with an observer. This area is covered with an observer. He can take the fort rather easily. He has these paths covered. This path is covered with a Zealot. So the only real dead space that he isn't seeing anything in is this part. And perhaps a pylon here wouldn't hurt in case there's 2 dropships that want to go into the natural, or perhaps land behind the third. Now, what I was mentioning about the 2-2 timing, Stats doesn't really seem to be going for that at all. He seems to be completely content with just sitting at home, getting Storm, getting 3-3 instead, and getting into a longer game. Not using his upgrade lead as of yet that much. Usually when you have an upgrade lead, you want to fight a lot, but perhaps for Stats, his upgrade lead just allows him to get into a late game more comfortable. So perhaps Stats feels very comfortable in the late game. It's always something to keep in mind. When I say something like a 2-2 timing would be very good, it is very good, of course, but a lot of people feel comfortable in different stages of the game. So they see advantages different. So for example, Cyril, if he's very far ahead, might just think, well, I can just go into a late game. And on the other hand, another player that is more all-in based might just be like, if I'm ahead, I'm just going to kill my opponent. There's just different mindsets, depending on how comfortable you feel at each stage of the game, of course. So Innovation right now taking to Ghost, getting that 2-2 upgrade, and a couple of mines as well. There's still a Prism in the dead space, but this one is probably gonna die. Oh yeah, okay. 2 Vikings coming in, will most likely just snipe this Prism. No recall being used on it, wouldn't have minded it. It's not like Stats is super rich, his income actually isn't that great. He's mining from 6 gas, only has 62 workers, so it's like a 2.2k income. His fort base just started, won't have any saturation, so he will pull behind in supply by quite a bit actually. So if you see Innovation on the other end is steadily mining 2.5 to 7k minerals. So that's 400 or 500 minerals more per minute. So that's about 10 supply per minute that Innovation is gaining. Over Stats. Stats trying to fortify this fort base. Once again, setting up these run-bys. Now this is the beauty of having vision on the map. So Stats basically knows whenever Innovation wants to make a play. And whenever Innovation will move out, these and these will most likely run into the bases. So these 4 will most likely go to the natural, these 3 will go to the 3rd base. Now to finish it, you might want to have a prism here, and then whenever he moves out, send a prism to the main. Then you're attacking 3 bases at the same time, and he has nowhere to run his SCVs to. So those are the things that are extremely important, and having vision of the map really allows you to do this kind of stuff. Now, I'm very curious to see what stats his unit composition actually is going to be, because he seems very stuck in this big charge lot stalker storm immortal army, but innovation is getting a very complete army with ghost. He's getting mines. This is a very scary army to fight for stats. Of course he does have a couple of Templars in the prison, but he's also down 30-40 supply because of that income difference in the past 2 to 3 minutes. They might do it. Okay, this is exactly what I meant, by the way. He sees him move out. He tried sending in these, but there was a cleanup squad by innovation. But these bad boys will decide to go in. However, Inno, being the brilliant player that he is, has 2 mines and a bunker positioned, absolutely clearing this up. Stats, however, very, very good at immediately sending a couple of new zealots. Now that the mines are gone, he will probably just send those in immediately, or I would be a little disappointed if he wouldn't. Okay, he's actually gonna wait with them. Well, that is not too great. Well, meanwhile we actually have a little bit of a skirmish here at the time warp zones. And there's actually not that many High Templar here. We see 1 High Templar here, 3 High Templar in the prison. Okay, there's 2 more Templar here, so we have about 6 or 7 Templar that are ready to fight. But this army and this setup for innovation, this concave, is going to be very hard to break. There's 8 mines, so he can't just jump on top of him. This is why I wouldn't have minded seeing either Colossus or even just getting a Disruptor to clear up the mines. Because once innovation kind of sets up in a position with this many mines, he has 17 mines in total. You can't really engage into it anymore with this kind of army unless you land masterful storms, but this actually looks very, very difficult to do for stats. Now, decides not to push forward completely. Just going back to his mine setup, and he's getting good trades. I mean, doesn't really need to push too hard. He's probably completely content at this point, just wasting away the storms. So remember when I said there's about 6 or 7 active Templar that could help in this fight? 3 have gone down already or have used all their energy. This one doesn't have a storm anymore. The 3 boys in here probably have 1 or 2 storms each. There's still a couple of storms left, but still has a pretty scary force here. There's no zealots either anymore, so the storms are really the only thing that's keeping stats alive at this point. He did try some harassment with zealots in the middle of the map at the same time, but it doesn't really seem to be working. The rallies that innovation is sending comes from so many barracks. Look at this. What is that? 8? Yeah, 8 barracks. So every time there's going to be maybe 4 marauders and 8 marines coming out. And if you have 5 zealots doing the harassment, that just won't be enough to kill the reinforcement. So stats really needs something else. He needs a way out, and perhaps getting 3-3 is something that can help him at least a little bit, perhaps stabilize. I mean, there's so many mines, he needs to clear those up. And one thing you can actually do, which he is doing right now, is you can use 2 storms to clear mines, because mines have 90 HP, storm does 80 damage. So if there's a bunch of mines clumped up, you can storm once, and then after 1 second you throw the second storm, and in that case all the mines die. Or you can just wait till your first storm runs out, then throw another one. Oh, here we go. This will be a big storm. Yeah. Kills only 2 of the mines actually, but it's something of a start. Mule of the prison making his way across the map, and this is actually a very interesting play. He realizes he's out of Templar and that this prison won't be of much use anymore, and he decides to counterattack with it, which is a very difficult decision to make as he's under so much pressure. I mean, most people at this point would just be focusing on their army completely, perhaps taking a new base to transfer these probes to if you feel like you can't hold this base, but Stats actually does have the clarity of mind to send his prism across the map, maybe harass this forward base, maybe put some pressure on the natural. And in doing a move like that, you force the reinforcements to stay home. So you actually make it easier for yourself to defend this push. So a very interesting play. We still have one Templar left with one Storm. Oh, there it goes. It's a decent Storm. But I think there might still be too many mines for Stats to truly be able to clean this up. Oh. Managed to push it back at least temporarily, but there's no real Zealot army. Of course, he does have the 3-3 upgrades. Inno is still only on 2-2. This is still not great for Stats, obviously. There's a fort base on the way. For innovation, there's an army that's extremely scary. A lot of medevacs are still alive. And medevacs are very expensive. They take some time to rebuild, especially because innovation only has a single starport. So keeping these alive is very nice for innovation. Now, here comes a run by with 3 zealots, and you'll see innovation turns around, at least with the reinforcements. He decides it's time to go home, regroup, and perhaps go for another push in a bit. Maybe wait for his 3-3 upgrades. Stats, meanwhile, has been tagging to Tempest, actually, which I think that's a rather wild play as well. Most of the time, against a composition like this, no Vikings, no Liberators, what you'll see is people just get Colossus. And Colossus and Storm together works very well, as Terra needs a lot of Vikings to deal with that, or a lot of Liberators to deal with Colossus. You can still kind of maneuver around that. Colossus Storm always kind of the composition you want to go for, but instead we see Stats getting a couple of Tempests. I'm very curious to see how he will use them. Of course, Tempests are great against air with their 15 range, but against ground they only have 10 range. And they actually don't do too much damage. Sure, they do a lot of burst damage, but there's not a lot of units that need bursting down. There's no tanks, I mean, I guess you could try to kill some of the medevacs with your range, but it seems like a rather ambitious play. Perhaps transitioning into a late game, which might not even happen this game, because I think Inno might be able to just finish him with what looks to be some kind of early late game, or even a late mid game army, just consisting of Ghost, Marine, Marauder, Mine, Medevac. I'm loving this harass, by the way, just constantly forcing innovation back, wanting to gather up his forces, regroup with his main army. And this is kind of the push that Inno has been waiting for. His 3-3 just finished. He is completely maxed. He cleaned up the prism. There's no real run-bys coming in. There's a prism on the way again, but it's going to be too late to push this army back. And Inno, I think, is in a very good position to take a good fight. So many medevacs, a lot of ghosts. He can scan forward to EMP. And there's actually... Oh, let's pause. There's 13 High Templars actually, so let's have a look. There's a couple here behind the base. There's a couple here. 5 Templar at the fort base, which could be used in this fight, obviously. Now the way that Stats positioned himself for this fight, let's actually go back a little bit, is he spreads out a bunch of his High Templar above his Nexus, then he spreads out some High Templar here, some High Templar here, just making sure that he can't get hit by a single EMP. Like this will need at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 clumps of Templar which will need to get EMP'd, and it's very difficult to do that without getting stormed a single time. So he probably wants to push, or kind of shoot at him from a distance with the Tempest, and then once Innovation decides to commit to an attack, you use one of your High Templar and you just storm. These are some actual very good EMPs. These would be very helpful. Stats actually does decide to send them over. Now the Templars from the top part of the Nexus actually come into play. 2 Archons being warped from the High Templar without energy. Those Immortals and Tempest actually do kind of stand their ground, but there's just so many medevacs providing so much heal that unless you're hitting storms, this army just doesn't really seem to be dying at all. I mean, there's 13 medevacs. Innovation is not aware of this 5th base. If he was, he probably would have killed this in his retreat. But as he's not aware, I mean, makes no sense to go there, I guess. After deciding this angle is probably not for him, he decides to rotate to a different angle, but I think this angle will be even harder to engage up in. Stats completely aware of it as well, with decent vision. Has no vision of this area, but I think that's okay. There's a couple of Templar there, but none of them actually have Storm. So this might actually be a little dangerous if he managed to get up the ramp. His army looks rather small though. Bit of a careless engagement here by Stats, just walking in with his Archons first, getting killed before the Templars really arrive. So he lost a lot of supply there before the fight truly started. And now Inno is probably just happy with that, just retreats, loses a couple of mines, but doesn't matter too much. Meanwhile, Innovation still expanding behind this, getting planetaries, getting even a couple more workers, going up to 72. Oh, even more, 3 more workers on the way. Air weapons being added as well, a couple of Vikings in the mix now that there's Tempest out. Stats has a really old army consisting of Tempest, Immortal, High Templar. When you have this kind of an army, it's actually very important to have vision of your opponent's army. So I really would not mind seeing an Oracle. Just attack this army, you can shoot at a distance with your Tempest. And then storm whenever the ghosts get too close. Or whenever the bio gets too close. I think that would be a good play. Stats keeps coming back every single time with these sellers. Just sends them in, sees there's no opportunity for damage. Is like, alright, I don't need to do damage, I just wanted to do damage. Then he sends them back. Actually rather unlucky for him, revealing his own 5th base with that play. So now he's actually in a very tough position. Because this base seems really difficult to hold, but it's also a base that is extremely important for him. His natural is about to mine out, his main is basically mined out, his 3rd is about to mine out, his 4th is still kind of okay, it's a little healthy, but he needs a 5th base. Like his income is falling behind, he doesn't have enough mining going on. The only reason it's equal at the moment is because there was a burn, like 25 SCVs transferring. So innovation is going to be up by about maybe 800-900 income, unless Stats manages to secure this base. So the dilemma here for Stats is whether he wants to engage this or whether he just wants to sit back on 4 bases and kind of turtle up to a maxed army and then do some kind of push with that. But I guess he feels a little confident in holding it, as he does have some cannons here. He has a couple of zealots here as well, and he does have at least an interesting army and his own 3rd base as well. So we'll see how he will micro this. It's actually very funny to see Innovation's army with so many medevacs. Like every marauder has a personal medevac basically. And there's still the 26 marines. Big warp in of zealots once again. You just see the... It really hasn't done a lot of damage this game, the harass, but it's really annoying for Innovation to deal with. He had to send back his complete army, send back his reinforcements a couple of times already, so actually very well played by Stats, very well done. Really annoying Innovation at least. So here we once again see that play with poking at your opponent with the Tempest, trying to shoot him from a distance, baiting him into storm and then storming the army. Making sure your Templar never get EMP'd. Oh, and here the Templar got EMP'd. And most likely that's gonna be game. The moment that happens, you clump up all your Templar, you can just instantly lose the game. Let's just look at it one more time. So at this point the fight actually is going rather well for Stats. Inno is losing a decent amount of supply, a lot of storms are hitting. And he still has... Okay, he has 2 storms left on this guy basically. There's gonna be storms coming in on at least 2 more Templars. So I have like 3-4 more storms. He can warp in. Even though the spine is about to fall, he can warp in here though. So I think he should be able to hold if he doesn't get this big EMP. But then the big EMP hits and all of a sudden there's a single Immortal and 4 Tempest shooting. And that's not enough to clear this army. But with storms it's a very different fight. So Stats will lose this game, lose the 5th. I mean, this game is completely over. But yeah, in my opinion, a rather interesting game. Let's see the GG. stats actually staying in rather long. Maybe he thinks he has a chance with a forward base on the bottom. No, GG's out. And Innovation wins it. So well done by him. Yeah. If you enjoyed it, thumbs up in the thing below. And leave a comment and stuff. And if you hated it, send me an email. Bye bye.